Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This week we have a very special guest. The host of Tooth and Claw podcast, Wes Larson, joins us to talk about the Southern Cassowary. Wes is a wildlife biologist and hosts a podcast that talks about human-wildlife conflict, or extreme wild animal attacks. Wes recently went to Australia and saw cassowaries in the wild, so we asked him to join us for a full episode on what many people call the most dangerous bird on the planet. I guarantee that you're going to love this episode, so go grab your binoculars and let's get into it. Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This is RJ and I'm with John, Shannon, and Amanda. And we have a special guest to talk cassowaries this week. Wes Larson is joining us from Tooth and Claw podcast. Hi, Wes. How's it going?
Hey, it's going great. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Of course.
It'd be great for our listeners who aren't familiar with you to get a little bit of like your backstory. Do you mind talking just a little bit about kind of who you are and also like your experience with bears?
For sure. Yeah. So I'm a wildlife biologist. I have focused mostly on bears throughout my career. I started in 2011, and like a little backstory, I was always obsessed with animals, grew up in Montana, kind of decided in college that I would get into some sort of pre-medical field because I just thought I needed to earn money and like be responsible, and was miserable in it. Didn't like studying it, didn't like shadowing doctors, just didn't like it at all. So I went back and found a professor that was doing the kind of wildlife stuff that I wanted to do, and just pretty much went and bothered him every other week for a year and a half until he finally gave me a job working on a polar bear project. And then after I proved myself on that project, he hired me on as a grad student, and I did my master's with him. That's Dr. Tom Smith, and worked on both polar and black bears. After I graduated, I went on to work with sloth bears in India, grizzly bears here in Montana and Wyoming, and started Tooth and Claw podcast, which is kind of right now my main thing, but still doing a bit of biology too.
Cool. And so Tooth and Claw, so I've listened to a bunch of episodes and I'm a big fan. I love kind of the format and everything, but do you want to tell our audience who isn't familiar with it kind of what Tooth and Claw is all about?
Definitely. My main experience with bears was human-wildlife conflict. That's what I wrote papers on. That's what I was interested in. And my advisor, Tom, had done a lot of work on attacks specifically. And so we talked attacks all the time. Like for 4 or 5 years, every time I talked to him, we'd end up just talking about attacks. And I started to notice there's this huge difference in kind of the actual story behind those attacks and then what the news would say when they broadcast. When they would say what happened, it was always a bear stalking a person or a bear, on a murderous rampage. But really, then when you looked at the facts, it was more like the people had food in their tent, or they surprised a bear while they were hiking, and the bear kind of reacted in a natural way. And I always loved those stories, but it felt like we almost couldn't tell them because it would demonize the animal and make people more worried about going out in the great outdoors. And so Tooth and Claw is kind of the way that I came up with to tell those stories in a fun way that people can kind of get that gore that we all love and like hear those stories, but then also hear, why often it was the person that actually did something wrong that led to the animal reacting in a really natural way. And I think having that information empowers people to be much more prepared when they go into the great outdoors and realize that, like, if they're doing everything right and they see a bear, they get to enjoy that experience. They get to create a new passion for that animal rather than being afraid and worried of like every cracking twig in the forest.
Yeah.
I love that. I feel like all of your episodes, they're so entertaining, but you also walk away with like a knowledge of, what to do, what not to do. I don't know. Amanda and I lived in Colorado for a while, and so we saw a ton of black bears there. And, just being around black bears and kind of the culture there, you learn what not and, what not to do. But if I saw a mountain lion, I wouldn't know how to act. Or if we were vacationing somewhere with other animals I wasn't as familiar with, I'd have no idea. So I love listening to that and kind of being able to walk away with a little bit of knowledge.
I grew up in the mountains, British Columbia, and believe me, bears and mountain lions are things to pay attention
Totally. Yeah.
Bears routinely run through my mom's backyard, pull the doors off of her shed, looking for whatever they're looking for. And you get a healthy respect for bears. They're huge when you see them up close. And Wes, your story about how you got to be where you are makes me laugh, because John and I were both nodding as you talked, because the only career counseling I got as a kid was you're too smart to be a nurse, you should be a doctor, and then you should stop being weird. because I used to bring dead things home and take their bodies apart at the picnic table in the backyard of our house. And so I was going to go be a medical doctor because I didn't know any better, until I ended up in an experience that made me realize there was more you could be if you were interested in biology than a medical doctor. So, and then I completely pivoted.
Yeah.
Yep. And
John,
I was a pre-med. I was a pre-med until I was taking cell biology my junior year and realized somebody might pay me to study birds the rest of my life.
Yeah. It's a real change. I think for me, I remember being in I was kind of focused on optometry, and I was in an optometrist office, and he would tell me about his schedule, and then he'd be like, but on the weekends I get to go outside and go hiking. And I remember just thinking, why don't I just do something where I can do that? Why don't I shift to where that's my job? So, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, before we get into talking about cassowaries, I just wanted to point out that the Lions of Tsavo are at the Field Museum where John and Shannon work.
Amazing. Yeah. I need to get there.
Yeah.
Well, if you ever want to talk to some people who have done a lot of research on that, we definitely know who to talk to.
Cool. Yeah. I know that they've looked really into their dentition and all sorts of different things with those lions. So if I'm ever in Chicago, you are going to hear from me, because I really want to see those cats and I want to learn more about them.
Oh, and then we'll show you birds so you can actually see the
Perfect. Yeah. I love birds. I actually, my girlfriend works for a company that does birding tours, and they are trying to get more into mammals too. So they've hired me to do some guiding for them, but it's still very bird focused. So I've had to learn my birds, and I've had to get a lot better at both South American and North American birds. And I've caught the bug. I really have, especially with photography. It's really, really fun. So I totally get it. I get the birding craze. Yeah.
Well, should we get into talking about the cassowary then?
Sure.
Yeah.
By all means.
So we're going to talk about the Southern Cassowary today, right? That's the cassowary that you went down and saw in Australia, and I feel like most people are familiar with. So should we, for our listeners who have no idea what a Southern Cassowary is, should we just start off with a little description of what they're like, what they look like?
Well, they're 2 meters tall, weigh as much as a person, 130, 150 pounds. The females are bigger than males. And then they're flightless, and their feathers have devolved. So they have these bizarre kind of bifurcating feathers at the base. And then they have this thing called a casque on the top of their head that is, very aerated, just like a lot of bird bones are. It's made of keratin, so like a hoof or something like that. And it's highly vascularized. And then they have all this bizarre skin colors on their face. They have wattles. They're both beautiful and ugly, kind of all at the same time. But of course, I've only seen them dead or in zoos. But
yeah, Shannon, how many do you have at the Field Museum? How many specimens?
we have, believe it or not, we have 20 from the genus as a whole, which has 3 species in it. And we have a whole bunch from the zoo. 9 of the 20 are from the zoo. And then there's one that says captive, and I don't even know the backstory behind that one. And the other ones we have are from New Guinea. So believe it or not, instead of having the ones from Australia where you might think we would have them from, we actually have them from New Guinea. And we have eggs, which is really cool. The eggs of cassowaries are green, and they're pretty interesting looking.
Are those some of like the largest specimen that you have then at the Field Museum? I guess, I mean, aside from ostrich, are they one of the biggest birds in existence?
They are, and a number of the specimens will actually probably be juveniles. And then the other thing is, with a bird that big, you're not making a round specimen like you would with an oriole or a blackbird. You're actually just saving the skin of the bird itself in the drawers.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have enough space to put a whole bunch of 6 feet tall specimens in our collections.
They're the third tallest and second heaviest bird in the world. Yeah.
And then so that cask that they have on top of its head, what is that made out of, and what is its function? It looks like it has a big like shark fin on top of its head.
A little bit. There's been a whole bunch of hypotheses about what that cask is for. And at first, a lot of people thought it had to do with some kind of sexual selection display. But the latest understanding is that because it's so vascularized, there's a bunch of blood vessels in there, that it's something that can dissipate heat for a bird in a hot environment. So that's a little less dramatic than it being either something that it's used in antagonistic interactions or to get a mate or something like that. Now people think it's used to dissipate heat. The same way lots of birds' beaks can do that. They're heavily vascularized. And if you stick one of those cameras that can tell you the temperature of your wall when you're looking for where heat is escaping from your house, I love house shows. So I've seen plenty of people use these heat guns on their house to figure out where they're losing heat. And when you put that on a lot of birds that have these really strange either beaks or appendages off the tops of their heads, you can see very clearly that it's hot. They're red compared to the environment around them, other skin on them. So, it's natural to think now that we have technology that lets us point a little one of these cameras on these birds and say how hot their heads are, that it's used more for dissipating heat than it is for sexual selection or mate selection. Or there's some goofy hypotheses that it kept the branches from hitting the bird's head, which I don't. Did you ever see that, Wes, when you saw them? Was someone doing that?
I definitely didn't see them trying to avoid branches with their cask, but I did see that there was a lot of theories, and I tend to agree with what you said, that most recent theory is the most likely to be correct. Something I was thinking about is, I think sometimes at least with mammals, when they are defending themselves from humans, they tend to do it the same way they would from like a bear, for example. When they attack a human, they kind of use their same weapons that they would with another bear. So to me, with cassowaries, where they tend to kick at us when they do have these negative interactions with people, I think if they were using that cask as a way to defend themselves, they would use it with people too, or with dogs, or with whatever kind of threats they run into, and they don't. So I think what you said makes a lot of sense, that it probably isn't for that. It's much more likely temperature regulation.
So you went to Australia and went out to see cassowaries. That makes you much better off to talk about this than any one of the four of us. Tell us a little bit about that trip.
I disagree with you, but I will talk to you about it. We went to Australia, and it was a family trip, but I was doing everything I could to sneak in as much wildlife as I could. So we saw a lot of the really iconic Australian species. Like, we saw kangaroos, we saw koalas, we managed to go out and see great white sharks, which are maybe my favorite animal in the world. But the animal that I came back home thinking about was the cassowary. That was the one that I couldn't stop thinking about. Yeah. I kept going back to my photos of it. And we were in Cairns, which is northern Queensland, and we had to get down to Townsville, and that takes you right along the Cassowary coast, and we were driving. And so I had done my research and looked at the hot spots for cassowaries. There's one called Eddy Bay, Etty, and it's kind of just like a little tiny town, and then there's an actual beach there. And that is the beach that you go to. That is where you are supposed to see cassowaries. Everyone said it's almost a guaranteed sighting. So we went there at the right time of day, didn't see anything, didn't see any tracks. There was other people waiting. A woman there said they hadn't seen them for a day and a half. So then we went to Mission Beach, where we were staying, which was the second highest kind of concentration, but a much bigger area that you have to look through. And so I spent probably 8 or 9 hours driving around Mission Beach, looking at the internet, trying to find hot spots and just striking out, like not seeing them anywhere. Drove back to Eddy Bay the next morning, then drove back to Mission Beach and was about to give up. And then I realized there's a Facebook group of residents of Mission Beach that loved cassowaries. And I just wrote on there, I said, hey, I'm a traveling bear biologist. I really, really, really want to see a cassowary. Any advice you guys can give me would just be so helpful. And a couple of them commented and said, try, these spots. And they gave me 3 or 4 recommendations. And so on our drive out of town, on our way to Townsville, I said, can we just go by these spots? And by then my family was getting a little tired of looking for cassowaries, but they were like, fine, you can go. And as we were driving, and my brother said, we should drive up this little street. And I said, okay, let's do it. And we just caught the glimpse of this big black body in someone's front yard. These are really urbanized cassowaries in this area. They have some really good jungle, but then they also kind of hang out in people's landscaping, eating their fruits and stuff. Wow. And I think it was a male. I think it was a juvenile male. But just the brightly colored neck, the beautiful coloration on the face and the wattles. And for me, it felt like seeing a dinosaur. It was like seeing this animal walk out of this yard, and I was just entranced. And we followed it for a while, and it just didn't care about us and was feeding and foraging. And then we got back in the car, and as we were leaving town, a really big, beautiful female was on the edge of the forest. Oh. And we stopped, and I tried to get a photo of her, but she ducked right back in, which I was glad she did. It seemed like a much wilder experience, the second one. But yeah, I just couldn't stop thinking about him afterward. It felt again like seeing a true life dinosaur, and they definitely left a big impression on me.
That's awesome.
That's how I feel about shoebills too.
Oh yeah.
When I'm looking at them, that's
yeah,
what they seem like to me.
Yeah.
So are cassowaries related to dinosaurs? Is there a link? Do we know, or?
Well, all birds are related to dinosaurs, right? They descend from dinosaurs. So their dinosaurs didn't go extinct. They just turned into birds and are flying around today. But no, they're not more closely related to any dinosaur than they are to the cardinal in your backyard or whatever cooler birds that Wes has in Montana. I might be a little biased towards the West.
So can we talk about like their feet a little bit then? Because I know that's something that a lot of people compare to dinosaurs, is kind of that claw that they have to like velociraptors almost. So they have like 3 toes or 3 different toes on their feet, and one that has like a pretty large claw that could cut you open. Is that right?
Yeah, like 5-inch long claw. Pretty impressive. Yeah.
Yikes.
And you haven't covered that bird in your podcast? Tooth and Claw hasn't covered one?
We've covered
Why
them.
didn't I see that one when I looked?
It was an earlier episode, and it was it was an interesting one because there's not like a really great story. There's not like one story that's like, oh man, this is our cassowary story. But there was a scientific paper that was published where someone summarized all the 200-something incidents on record with people. And most of them are very similar, where it's like someone was feeding these birds and then they ran out of food and the bird got upset at them. But there were some really other interesting ones. And I don't know if you're ready to go into those now, but I'm sure you guys want to talk about cassowaries and people a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I like words. I love the meanings of words. And so the casque is French for helmet. So that's where the name from that came from. And then I was wondering, where the heck did the word cassowary come from? So I had to look that up too. And it's from 2 Papuan words meaning horned head. So that makes logical sense too. So there's my words for the day.
Very cool.
Yeah, but the biogeography, I think, is really neat. So they're on New Guinea, and then there's the southern species, which is on New Guinea, but also crosses over and gets all the way down into Australia to where you were. And it sounds to me like a lot of the issues are related to, as it is with most birds, literally and I'm sure bears too, actually, defending young. And in cassowaries, it's really interesting because they're part of this early radiation of birds, and it's not uncommon in that radiation, which includes ostrich, but also includes kiwis and emus and rheas, to have
and tinamous.
And tinamous, to have the male do the actual incubation, and then they're basically brooding the young, where the females actually go off and will mate with other males. And so I'm guessing a lot of the interactions people have are also situations, if there's young around, where they feel like the young are threatened, that they can probably get pretty defensive, and that's going to be the males that are doing that.
I mean, that's certainly what they used those claws for before humans came into the picture and started feeding them and getting too close to them. And the biogeography is really interesting, because some people speculate that they originated on islands that have changed, whether they're above the water or below the water. And they're really good at swimming, which is incredibly hard to imagine that a bird that big is swimming, but they do. And so do the babies. Really interesting. They're really important for forests, and they're often called the gardeners of a forest, because they swallow seeds whole, and they have really short digestive tracts, and so the seeds come out pretty much intact on the other end. But the birds have really large home ranges, so they can travel for several kilometers from one place to another place, and then they poop where they drop this. The seeds poop comes out, and that's a nutrient to fertilize the seeds as they grow. So they're really important for making sure that plants that are too close to each other and too related to each other don't keep breeding, which is, not good for the genetic diversity of the plant. Don't want to have too much inbreeding. So they spread seeds all over the place, which is really cool. So they walk long distances. And that's why habitat degradation is so important, not just because if you start fragmenting the cassowary range, you potentially harm them, but because you change the dynamics of the forests. They eat over 200 species. Oh. So they're pretty omnivorous in their, eating of plants with big seeds. But
when we did our episode on cassowaries, I remember there reading about how there's actually a few plants that essentially have to pass through a cassowary system to be germinated. Wow. And that's they have a 4% chance of being germinated if they don't pass through a cassowary. But if they do pass through a cassowary, it goes up to almost 90%. And so it's pretty impressive, how much of an ecosystem engineer these birds actually are.
And this is a tropical forest ecosystem too. So this is dense forest, and so it's not like ostriches and rheas, which are running around in open country in South America and Africa. These are forest dwellers.
I wanted to ask, I was so interested in how the female is how the male is the primary caretaker for the young and actually sits on the eggs, and the female is the one that goes and tries to mate with everybody. And I thought that was really cool. Are there other birds that are like that?
There are. So some of these birds like tinamous and I'm not so sure about. I think ostriches are actually the same way. And one of the funny things is cassowary eggs are really beautifully kind of emerald green colored, and tinamous actually have some incredible. They have these immaculate, almost enamel-like eggs that kind of shine and are blues and greens. And one of the crazy hypotheses for why that evolved was that the females do that so that the males actually are afraid to leave the nest. And I don't think that's really what's going on.
Yeah.
But there are other birds that do that, Amanda.
Okay.
So there are shorebirds and and usually that's accompanied by reverse sexual dimorphism. So the females might be brightly colored, the females might be bigger in those kinds of species where that happens. So it's not the most common, but I think cassowaries do it both ways. Even though the parental care is done by males, the male goes out and mates with other females too. And then the female goes out and mates with other males. So it's not as easy as it's just the females that are going around.
Okay. And
Covering
then
their
I
bases.
have to. Yeah, exactly. And then I wanted to ask. I always like to ask because this RJ hates talking about penises. What's the situation down there with these guys? Because I know not everyone has a penis.
Don't they have some really unique reproductive organs? I feel like, Wes, when we listened to your episode, you guys got into...
Oh, let's hear it, Wes.
I think you're right. It's been so long, though. I don't want to misspeak, but I do think they did have some really interesting reproduction. You're right. Yeah, this is bringing back memories because for me on Tooth and Claw, like I do find when you dig into these animals, often the reproductive behavior is some of the most interesting because it's just like each animal has developed a really unique way to like improve their chances of passing on their genes. But yeah, I honestly can't remember what it was with cassowaries.
Well, we're going to have to do a follow-up on that because I don't know the answer either.
So if
I didn't find that.
We didn't really find it much about it either. Yeah, that's why I thought somebody would
If they had huge, gigantic penises like ducks, there would be
know.
pictures.
Okay.
that we would know, I think.
Okay.
So I'll fact check this before we like post anything in the episode, but I feel like from what I heard on your episode, Wes, was that they have both a penis and a cochlea, and that their penis inverts into their body almost like a finger on a glove, was the way that it was described. But that it was more ornamental and not like actually used as part of the reproduction, that they still use their cochlea for that. Is that ringing any bells?
That's ringing some bells. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I would
Cloaca.
Cloaca.
okay.
Yeah.
Cloaca.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
I'm
As
sorry.
someone it's okay. As someone who has cochlear problems, I was trying to picture
Oh no.
what exactly you were talking about.
Oh no. We can cut all this.
I
No,
remember
it's
that.
funny. It's hilarious.
And I think that was the female specifically that had like she had kind of like a pseudo penis or something, but I'm struggling to remember it. So again, I don't want to misspeak. I wish I'd listened to the episode before this.
The crazy thing, all birds have cloacas, males and females, and so the penis is embedded within the cloaca of the male.
Oh, okay.
But they
I
don't
wonder
all
how-
have
I won-
penises, which is really bizarre when you think about, the idea it's called a cloacal kiss in a lot of literature, which kind of cracks me up anyways. But there can be nothing. It's got to be weird how that actually happens when you think about how that bird is ginormous. So, are there pictures?
We didn't run
I'm
into
not
any.
sure.
I'm
Yeah.
always looking for that stuff. Yeah.
Well, most people don't. You don't see birds actually having sex. This is
Right.
not the most common thing.
We saw a bunch of mallards just last weekend. We were at the Botanic Gardens, and Shannon, it was kind of like on our mallard episode what you were telling us about how sometimes the males would surround a female, and we saw that kind of starting, and I don't know, I was thinking, Amanda, we should walk away. I don't want to watch what's happening next.
But you could go explain it to people, RJ. Now
True.
we know.
You're right. Yeah.
that could almost be a Tooth and Claw episode.
It could be, yes. My co-hosts would absolutely love to talk about this for hours on end. Yeah.
Me too, Wes. I love it too.
Well, Wes, I was wondering, of the cassowary attacks that you had, were there any that kind of stood out that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, definitely. So I do. It's funny when you read about this bird and you hear about this bird, it's often named the world's most dangerous bird, which I don't fully agree with. I know that ostriches kill a lot more people than cassowaries ever have, and like probably honestly like magpies in Australia probably attack a lot more people than cassowaries do, but they do have a really formidable set of claws. So I do think they kind of, it's not so much that the quantity, it's that when it does happen, it can be very violent. And so I did read that paper, and it had, hundreds of different examples. A lot of them did involve people that were feeding cassowaries, and then the cassowary decided it wanted more, and the person didn't have more, and the cassowary got pretty aggressive. Or there were cassowaries that had been food conditioned, and so when a person showed up that was being totally innocent, the bird was like, oh, that means food, and it approached the person and turned into something a little bit scary. But there's actually only 2 recorded incidents of a fatality from cassowaries. And one was in 1926, and that's the one that I found most interesting, because the other one was a captive bird in Florida in 2019. But the one in 1926 was a wild cassowary, and it was some kids who were out. They had a ranch or a farm, and they were out. There's kind of 2 different accounts. One was that they were just out with their dog, and the dog chased the cassowary, and the kids tried to defend their dog, and the cassowary ended up knocking both the kids down. And the older brother, who was 16, defended his younger brother, and then he got knocked down, and the cassowary got a kick in that managed to just cut his throat, and he bled out. And the other story, and this was actually the newspaper article in 1926 after it happened, reported it as they were on their horses, and their dog bayed up a cassowary. It had chased a cassowary and backed it into a corner. So the cassowary charged at the dog and was fighting with the dog. So the kids got down to try and protect their dog because the cassowary was winning that fight. And the same thing kind of happened. The younger kid got knocked over. He was 14. Older brother tried to intervene. He got knocked over and got the slit throat. And so that's the only wild cassowary on record that's ever killed a person. But I know early explorers or, early colonizers in Australia did say that among the indigenous people and in Papua New Guinea too, that these birds had a very fearsome reputation. So who knows, if there's been a lot of other victims that we could add to that list. But in recent history, there's those 2, and one was a captive bird.
Okay.
But it's interesting to think about that. Completely, I'm thinking about your bear experience, and I'm guessing in Australia, there's a lot of pressure on people from the government not to feed them, just like there would be pressure on people in Montana and Colorado not to feed black bears. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do that, then they're probably not competing with you. So it sounds like, based on those 2 stories, it's really about if the animal's cornered and feels like it needs to fight back, it's going to.
It's a defensive thing, and that's how most attacks are, I think. It's the animal defending itself. And I think you have to push them pretty hard for them to defend themselves to that level. It is funny at that Eddy Bay spot, the spot for cassowaries to see them. When you pull up, there's a big sign that you can't miss that says do not feed them. And then it's really funny. It says, they hate you. They will attack you. It's I don't know about that, but I'm not going to feed them.
That's an awesome sign.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'd rather avoid you.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's only because people have conditioned them to think of people as bearers of food, that they're being followed while they're hiking or something like that, because they would have no expectations until fairly recently that humans brought them food.
Definitely.
And they're certainly not bringing them the food, that the seeds that they usually eat.
Right.
Kind of bringing him probably whatever human things that don't have enough nutrients, just like bread for ducks. Do not feed bread to ducks. It's not good for ducks. There's no nutrients for the duck in it. Don't feed. I know it's cute, but don't feed bread to ducks.
Yeah.
So, we've conditioned them to follow us.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, my mind always goes back to bears too, and kind of their evolution. And I think, in North America, we have two bears that are very different in their response to humans. We have a black bear who evolved to kind of be the little brother of the bears. It's like the stepchild of the bears, where it just tries to get up a tree. It tries to get away, because a lot of those bears did evolve with a much more kind of dynamic and aggressive animal. They evolved with grizzly bears. So I think especially in places where those 2 species overlap, you see a real kind of aversion to conflict with black bears and a much more aggressive grizzly bear. And I think about cassowaries, they really didn't have any threats as adults throughout their evolutionary history. This is an animal who is kind of top dog in a lot of their environments that they live in. And even people didn't, like even the native peoples of those areas, like, this isn't a tasty bird. I read this anecdote that was like, if you're cooking cassowary, put it in the pot with a big stone. And when the stone is soft, the cassowary's done. So it's like, it's supposed to be really hard, just really tough. So people didn't eat them either. So I think they do tend to have that kind of top dog mentality when approaching a threat. And I think now they have a lot more threats with feral animals and like encroachment from people. But I do think that's some of the reason we see that heightened level of defensiveness, because they haven't really evolved to be an animal that has to get away from anything.
I will say that ostrich is actually pretty good.
Oh, interesting. Oh yeah, I think I've had ostrich too.
I've never had cassowary, but ostrich is pretty good.
Yeah.
I've heard of ostrich burgers.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
We ate quite a bit of ostriches when we were in South Africa, so it was really commonly the same way you might get chicken or beef, but it was in everything. It was in stews and soups.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Is it farmed then? The ostrich?
They farm them here. Yeah. Even in Montana,
Yeah.
I know there's some ostrich farms. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Louisiana, the ag people at LSU used to farm ostriches, and they were extremely aggressive if you got to the edges of their pens. And in fact, at least one of them choked itself while trying to get at a human that was outside the pen and got its neck stuck in the fence.
But again, my guess is they were looking for food.
Oh, right.
Just like Wes is talking about these stories. And I guess one of the things I'm really fascinated by in what you were, you're talking about your trip is just how elusive they can be.
Oh, yeah.
And so even in a landscape where there's humans around, they're not just hanging out on, they're going in and out of the forest, and they're good at it.
Yeah. The one that we saw on the edge of the forest, the second it ducked in, it was gone. I mean, and we sat there for probably 10 minutes, and I saw kind of a glimmer of it, maybe a foot within the forest line. But had I not been really looking for it, there's no way I would have ever seen it. I mean, it's dense tropical jungle. So they're very suited to their habitat.
Wes, I just wanted to ask, RJ and I are so interested in, he was mentioning before, we know what to do with a bear. And actually, where we lived in Colorado, they've reintroduced wolves, and now we know what to do with that. And when you were in Eddy Bay, and did they, besides stay away, did they say anything to do if you do have an encounter? I'm
trying to remember, if there's any signage about what to do. It's kind of, I'm vaguely remembering that it was, some of the advice was to put something between you and the bird.
Okay.
If you can get a tree or a vehicle or anything between you and the bird, that can really help. But yeah, I don't know. I remember in our episode, we kind of went into the expert tips of what to do if you're attacked by a cassowary. But I think the main thing is don't put yourself in that sort of position to begin with. Don't approach a cassowary, and you're probably going to be fine. Because they don't.
One of the recommendations is don't go up into a ball. Don't wad yourself up in a ball.
Yeah, because they'll kick at you on the ground.
Too much flesh for the claw, but yeah. So
that's interesting, because I would think you'd want to protect your underbelly or whatever, but maybe they'd get the back of your neck or whatever.
Yeah, and I think you're surrendering control to the bird. Then at that point, it's it can kick you as long as it wants, and you have no really real recourse. So I think that's something we constantly talk about is making sure that you have control over these kind of interactions, whether with a bear that's carrying a deterrent, but I think with something like a cassowary, that's more giving them plenty of space when you see them.
Yes.
I feel like in that sense, cassowaries are actually a lot like the big cats, where for the most part, things like mountain lions and jaguars, you can be around them and you won't know it. And they may not, they can be around and not have any interest in giving you any problem. And I'm guessing the cassowaries, you could probably walk right by them in the forest and not know it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do they leave trail marks the way elephants do in some forests? Do you know?
I don't know. I know that so when we were looking for them, we were mostly just driving roads and like looking in kind of this shoulder habitat near the cities. But then we went on one nature walk in this preserve right by Mission Bay, and we immediately were just set upon by so many mosquitoes that it was like not worth it at all.
Yeah.
But we had heard that you could look for kind of like their passageways through the trees, and cassowary scat is pretty noticeable too, because they do eat a lot of fruit and a lot of nuts and seeds come out. So I did see one pile of cassowary scat, and it was very recognizable. It was full of round nuts and seeds from fruit. But aside from that, I don't know if there's really a trail, like a game trail type situation.
Wes, I loved your description of just the feeling of seeing the animal, like the thrill of seeing a new animal for the first time. And I feel like that's, we all love animals, and that's such a relatable feeling when you see something you haven't seen before for the first time in the wild. I just really love the way you described that. Are there any other animals that you have on your list that you're trying to see soon, or anything you want to check off?
Yeah.
What's next?
I'm headed to Borneo in a couple weeks, and so I really want to see an orangutan for my mammal, and for my bird, I really want to see the blue-headed pitta that's there. I was recently in Ecuador, and ant pittas really stole my heart. So I now look at what pitta species there are in different parts of the world, and that'd be a really cool bird to see. And then sun bears are there too, so that obviously any bear species. But so those are all high on my list. I think my number one bucket list mammal right now is probably a snow leopard, which I think is a bit of a pipe dream for me, but hopefully someday. And then for birds, it honestly might be a shoebill stork. We brought them up earlier, but that's a real high on my list bird.
John has seen them in the wild.
Amazing.
Yep. Go to Entebbe, Uganda.
Yeah, I heard Uganda's the spot. Yeah.
It's definitely the best place.
Cool.
When you do see it, think that its most closest living relative is a pelican.
That's amazing. Yeah.
That is cool.
Wes, this has been so awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. This is so much fun talking about this. And anytime you want to come back and talk birds, we'd love it.
Yes.
For sure.
Well, when you go to Borneo and see the blue-headed pitta,
I'll
let's
send
get
you
back
photos.
on.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll do a whole episode. That bird is amazing. And people should go look at pictures of, if they think this cassowary is just the most dangerous bird, you should go look at pictures of cassowary babies, which will not make you feel that way. They're striped and streaky and fuzzy and incredibly adorable.
Yes, so cute.
It takes them a few years to become an adult. They're brown until they start getting all of that bright colors and the glossy black part of their plumages. So
nice.
They're not always just scary.
Wait, so can we real quick, what is the bird that you said you wanted to see in Borneo? I'm not familiar with that. I know John and Shannon, I saw you nodding your head. I'm just curious what that is.
So blue-headed pitta is part of this family of a whole bunch of just incredibly brightly colored forest understory birds from the old world. And so Wes was talking about ant pittas, which are when he was in Ecuador, and there's a whole nother radiation. They're all kind of dull colored of these ant pittas in South America, which are not closely related, but are very similar behaviorally. They're these big bodied, long legged forest ground dwelling birds in forest. And so they're really hard to see. But the ones in the family Pittidae in Asia are some of the most brightly colored birds, and yet they're really hard to get a look at.
Yeah, I don't think it's likely that we'll see one, but I'm going to try.
I mean,
Yeah.
so 25 years ago, you wouldn't have seen pittas in Ecuador.
Yeah.
And people have figured out a way at the lodges to draw them out, and so people get a chance to see them. And I think the same thing's going on in parts of Asia, to Southeast Asia, to give people a chance to see them. They're also in Africa. There are a couple species.
Yeah, and the colors, we aren't doing them justice. When you go look at them, you'll think they're fake because they are so brightly colored. And then you'll look at them and say, how on earth can that survive? Because it's not cryptic unless you see it in its environment, and then it can look cryptic. But certainly if you open the drawer at the Field Museum, you will never think of those birds as cryptic. They are unbelievably brightly colored. So cryptism is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose, or the predator.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Wes, once you see him, maybe you can come back and we can do a full episode on him.
Perfect. Yeah,
That'd be
that sounds
awesome.
great. I'll just keep
And
seeing
you
new
should-
birds and we'll come talk about them.
Yeah.
But you have to come in person, and then we'll show you so you can see them
Perfect.
really up close.
Yeah,
Because
I'd love
if you-
to see your collection.
Yeah. My funnest memory like that was being sick, altitude sick, and everybody else went up the trail with me past me in Ecuador. And I sat down, and then I saw Rufus ant pitta, and nobody else did.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
So,
That's awesome.
tiny reward for being
Yeah.
sick.
Yeah,
It's the best way. Sit there and let the birds come to you.
totally.
Yeah. That's awesome.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Catch us next week. And thanks again, Wes. Make sure everyone check out Tooth and Claw podcast. Wes, do you want to plug it at all, or have anything else you want to plug?
No, I mean, I think I kind of gave everyone the gist earlier, but it's a fun show if you're into these kind of interesting interactions between wildlife and humans, and we do try and have a real kind of fun time with it. So, yeah.
How do you decide what species you're going to cover or what act you're going to cover?
We cover a lot of bears and sharks just because those are the ones that are typically the best documented. So we kind of pepper those in throughout, and then we try to do a new animal every like 4 or 5 episodes. So that's just like kind of how we've built it out to where we can do it hopefully for years and not just get to a point where all we can talk about is bears and sharks. But the tricky part with these stories is finding ones that, and this is what I ran into with Cassowaries, is finding a story that has a narrative, like that can fill 15 to 20 minutes of the storytelling component of our podcast. Because often, you know, if you do see an attack headline, it's like 4 lines and then that's it. And that's pretty hard to create a whole episode out of. But we've done it. We did it with Cassowaries. So
There were so many press things about the guy in Florida that got killed by his
Yeah.
own cassowary. I'm thinking there are lots of real biology things that need some press coverage, and there are 1,000 articles about some poor guy who got killed by his own cassowary in a pen.
yeah.
All full of the most dangerous bird in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the reason we started it, though, is like there is just a natural kind of interest in these kind of stories. And so I think if people are going to be interested in them, which I think they are no matter what, we wanted to make sure there's a way for them to access them and get the biology at the same time and get the conservation message at the same time. And so far it is going pretty well. We're really happy with how it's turned out.
I
Great.
think I'd be
I-
more afraid of a cardinal because that's the hardest thing that's ever bit me in my life.
I wanted to pitch my story from being in high school and going birding in a place in Tucson, Arizona. It was the sewage treatment plant, and there were a group of chickens there. And every time you would go there, the rooster would spot you and come sprinting around the pond and then start attacking you.
Yeah.
And at some point in time, he disappeared, and I've never heard, nobody ever owned up to what happened to him.
So then got to him.
But he was aggressive.
Yeah, that's great. We'll have you on. When we talk roosters,
There we
you're
go.
our guy.
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah.
I'm there.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Anything else
Yep.
we want to chat on before we call it for this? No?
I think we're good.
All right. Awesome.
Thanks, Wes.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
Wes.
thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Great
thanks,
meeting you.
Wes.
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 Thank
Yeah, this
you.
was great. Thank
This
you.
was
Great to meet you.
Thank
We'll see
Bye.
you. Nice meeting you too. Bye.
Bye. Thanks everyone for joining us. Check out our Instagram and TikTok for pictures of the birds that we discuss. If you have a question, please reach out to podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. Thanks again to Wes Larson for joining us. Everyone make sure to check out Tooth and Claw Podcast. Shout out to Jeff and Mike, the amazing co-hosts of Tooth and Claw as well. John, Shannon, Amanda, and I will be back with a brand new episode next week. See you then. Thanks, everyone.